There's a lake nestled in the Sierra Nevada mountains, an alpine body of water that, despite the altitude and the cold, it never freezes. It's called Lake Tahoe. It holds the memory of winter, but it doesn't freeze with the elements. It doesn't resist the cold. It integrates it by continually moving the water from the surface to the depths. Shallow lakes freeze because they lack the depth to keep the warmer water circulating and moving up to the surface. Lake Tahoe is one of the clearest, bluest lakes on this planet, even though big storms sometimes come and rough up the waters. From a symbolic frequency, it reveals something essential about unfelt grief. Most of us learn to either flood or freeze, to drown in too much emotion, or to lock it away in numbness. But Tahoe does neither. Tahoe is a metaphor of grief flowing in coherence, depth that can feel the elements while maintaining the freedom of movement, a stillness that can weather the storms and return to clarity. In this episode, we're stepping into this resonance. We often misunderstand numbness. We judge it as failure, as the inability to feel, as a sign of being blocked or broken. But there's nothing wrong with you if you experience numbness. Numbness is protection. Numbness is how the body says, this is too much to feel right now. It's the nervous system's way of preserving the ability to function when the field is overwhelmed. Like a fuse protecting an electrical current, it shuts down to prevent harm. But eventually, we may want to turn on the lights again. If you've carried exiled grief as numbness, this episode is for you. We'll explore how unfelt grief becomes an anchor, how numbness becomes mistaken for emptiness, and how we can begin to thaw it so we can move, integrate, and reveal its wisdom, becoming part of our depth, not our distortion, our clarity, not our coldness. Unfelt grief and numbness isn't actually a lack of feeling. It's a contracted field of information, a frozen memory, a suspended echo of something we never had space, safety, or permission to fully mourn. It's the gravity of what we haven't grieved. This episode is the first portal in this 9-part mini-series on the emotional and behavioral anchors that weigh us down in life. Welcome to Inner Integration. I'm Meredith Miller, and this is Numbness and the Echoes of Unfelt Grief. Numbness as a survival strategy. In this season of the podcast, we've been exploring how unfelt grief or exiled grief often begins before memory. It's pre-verbal, inherited, absorbed from our parents, the ancestral field, and the collective consciousness. Numbness might seem like the absence of feeling, but it's actually feeling-based information that got frozen in the nervous system, in the tissues of the body, and in the energy field. Numbness is survival intelligence. It's what the body did to stay safe and keep going. Yet it's also important to become aware of the ways in which we're numbing so we can free that frozen energy and liberate our souls. In ancestral fields, numbness often begins as silence. When grief couldn't be named or expressed, it becomes the inherited ambiance. It moves from one generation to the next, not as a conscious story, but as an underlying tone. But the grief is still there, unmet, unspoken, yet quietly shaping our sense of self and reality. And when we can't see it, we often think it's gone, but it's not. Thomas Hübl, an Austrian mystic and collective trauma healing facilitator, teaches the importance of recognizing what he calls the mute pain in trauma. This is the absencing or numbness. In his training programs, he teaches that what's really hurt is silent and frozen. It's actually not the hyperreactivity, like when people get triggered and lash out, even though that reaction can appear like a lot. Hubel says the thing that's hardest to find has the highest healing impact. He describes numbness like shutting a room in order to save the rest of the house. He says open the door and open the windows to let fresh air in, clean it, and make the room livable again. It's interesting that in movies, when someone dies, especially a child, the family often leaves their room as it is. They simply close the door. Time passes by, but that room remains suspended in time. Trauma is frozen energy that can't move, and a lot of energy goes into maintaining it frozen. Like how a freezer consumes a lot of energy to keep food and ice frozen. That's energy we can't use for accessing creativity, imagination, expression, love, connection, and contribution. When I help people locate and activate these frozen energy packets in the body, then process and integrate the learning, they free this energy and begin to shift into new levels of creative expression, imagination, intuition, insights, synchronicities, and purpose. This is part of the process of liberating the soul. I'm so excited to share with you that my new book is now available on Amazon and Audible. It's called Becoming Whole: How to Prevent Stockholm Syndrome and Transcend Darkness in Your Life and Relationships. This book is an essential holistic guide for understanding the shocking events that have happened in our world since 2020, where we are now, and where we can go if we don't want to follow the path of social engineering that's aiming to keep us in a state of captivity. My goal with this book is to help millions of people see the opportunity to liberate their souls from the learned helplessness caused by the ongoing psychological and spiritual warfare in our world, so they can thrive during these challenging times, restore wholeness and freedom, and create a better future for the next generations instead of passing this burden forward. One of my readers called this book a masterpiece and work of transformative art. He said this book puts into succinct and clear words what has occurred over the last 5.5 years and before, and illuminates the opportunity that this cosmic era is now presenting each and every one of us. Check out Becoming Whole by Meredith Miller in print, Kindle, or audiobook format. What have I lost that I haven't let myself mourn? This is the big question for the numbness anchor. Of course, if we look deeper into the depths, the resonance of our numbness actually has a root system. It connects back to our ancestry and even branches out into the culture and collective consciousness. Grief unexpressed stays in the body and field, echoing through present experience. Approaching the numbness with curiosity opens the door to remembrance, presence, and transformation. Grief is not only the loss of someone or something, but also the loss of what never was and what coulda, woulda, shoulda been. An unconscious inner navigation system assembles when unprocessed grief gets suspended in time and space within the psyche, the body, and the energy field. It forms a frozen grief map. These maps silently guide our choices, reactions, habits, perspectives, and relationships from a frozen point in the past where grief was too overwhelming to feel and process. It's not just a memory, it's a blueprint. And when grief isn't fully felt, it doesn't vanish. Instead, it crystallizes into a template that your nervous system, emotional body, energy field, and behavior unconsciously follow in order to keep it numb. The heaviness becomes normalized as numbness, and we don't usually notice it. Time collapses at the point of impact. The moment of the unresolved grief imprint becomes like a timestamp that your system never left. It stays there, still waiting for resolution, still informing the present based on the past, from childhood, from ancestry, from the collective subconscious, from historical events that happened, and also dreams deferred in order to survive. It's directional, but distorted. Like a compass magnetized by trauma, instead of guiding you toward your true north, it's like an anomaly in the magnetic field that leads you back to similar experiences. The grief is trying to unfreeze by returning to the resonance of the origin. The exiled grief and numbness shows up in daily life. Numbness is a shapeshifter. It rarely announces itself directly. Instead, it becomes the atmosphere we live in, so familiar we forget it's not who we truly are. These patterns aren't flaws, they're the imprints of inherited survival. They're what protected you and your lineage when feeling would have cost too much. Here's some ways that numbness disguises itself. Emotional flatness and stoicism, fatigue and exhaustion, apathy and procrastination, depression and giving up on trying, disconnection from dreams and desire, avoidance of vulnerability, intimacy, and tenderness, rationalizing emotions and disconnection from actually feeling them, fixing or rescuing others, focusing on what's wrong with someone else, like your partner, kids, friends, or people who aren't waking up. Overfunctioning, busyness, or hyperproductivity. Feeling like you're always on the outside looking in. A sense of something missing that you can't quite name. Longing for meaning or connection, but unable to locate it. The inability to cry, or the surprise when tears emerge out of nowhere. Losing track of time in dissociation, fantasy, or scrolling. These patterns aren't failures. They're evidence of your nervous system's intelligence. And often, they're echoes of ancestral emotional blueprints passed down through generations. When people couldn't afford to feel the grief, they passed on the silence instead. But now, the cost of not feeling it may be even greater. Numbness shows up in our relationships. Numbness doesn't only live in the silence of solitude, it often echoes most painfully in relationships. In partnerships, especially romantic and intimate ones, the protective freeze that forms around unfelt grief can be activated by moments of closeness and tenderness. Here are some ways that happens. 1. Emotional availability without emotional presence. This might look like you show up, you listen, you care, but something is missing. Maybe you're there for people in a way, but not entirely present. You might perform empathy, allowing others to feel safe to share their most vulnerable parts, while you're also protecting yourself from exposing your own vulnerability, because that's too scary. You might cry in movies because that's not real. It's a low-stakes emotional environment, but you don't really allow yourself to fully feel your own grief. 2. Disconnection masquerading as independence. Maybe you tell yourself, I don't need anyone, but beneath that might live an unspoken wound. No one was ever truly there for me. Or, people are dangerous. So connection becomes something you intellectualize as unnecessary because your body doesn't trust it. It may also show up as an avoidance of commitment and a gravitation towards situations defined by, let's just see where it goes, or let's just be present in the moment without labels, or even more simply, I'm busy with work. This is how you protect yourself from getting hurt, overwhelmed, abandoned, or destroyed again through intimacy. 3. Conflict avoidance as a survival strategy. Maybe you're used to not speaking your opinions or needs, letting things slide, saying yes when you want to say no, avoiding difficult conversations because your system is protecting you from pain. You learn that tension and conflict means rupture, rejection, ridicule, or loss. And somewhere deep inside, the grief said, if I speak up, I'll be abandoned or rejected, and that's a loss I can't bear. 4. Intimacy that feels like pressure. When your heart is frozen, closeness can feel like intrusion, so you push people away or run away because it's overwhelming. A loving connection might trigger withdrawal because to feel deeply also means contacting layers of grief stored in the body. This isn't a lack of love, It's the residue of unprocessed pain trying to stay buried by avoiding intimacy and love. 5. Attracting others who mirror your numbness. You may find yourself in relationships that feel flat but stable. There's no real chaos, but no real aliveness either. This can be an unconscious agreement. I won't ask you to feel if you don't ask me to. Sometimes people end up in these kinds of marriages that last decades or a lifetime because the lack of intimacy and connection feels safe. 6. Over-functioning partner roles. You might become the caretaker, fixer, therapist, or helper for others. And it's not that it's bad to help or care for others, but these roles help you stay in control and avoid vulnerability. Beneath the over-functioning is an unmet grief that taught you, my needs don't matter. And the pain of experiencing that again is too much, so you downplay or erase your own needs while helping the relationship to stay intact, yet not too exposed to realness. When numbness meets intimacy, just as we're about to open, soften, or connect, something within recoils. That's because the connection with another invites us into the depths where the long-held grief resides, and we might not be sure we're ready to feel that yet. To the partner reaching out, this can feel like rejection, painful, like a door that slams shut just as you reach the threshold. But underneath, what's really happening is a trauma response. It's not personal. It's a survival reflex from an earlier pain that was never fully met. In episode 2, I mentioned an experience I had several years ago. A man I was dating would retreat just as we got close. It was heartbreaking, but after I stopped blaming him and I sat with the pain and confusion, eventually a deeper truth surfaced. I realized I was also disconnected from my own pain. I was trying to meet someone in a place I hadn't yet met myself. That was a turning point. That's when I began a simple, quiet embodiment practice. No phone, no distractions, just me on the patio, letting myself feel whatever wanted to emerge in the moment. And it wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was actually subtle and tender. Over time, that rewired something. I was no longer running away from myself at the very moment I wanted to be seen, felt, and connected. And that's what I want to emphasize here. This isn't about blaming the person who retreats or even blaming yourself if you notice this tendency. It's about bringing presence and coherence to the field, starting within. The kind of presence and coherence that we cultivate with ourselves becomes the frequency through which others find us and feel safe enough to return to themselves too. Numbness isn't the absence of love. The desire to love and be loved is trapped beneath generations of unshed tears and unspoken truths. Recognizing this with curiosity and compassion opens the door to inner healing and shifting the relational patterns that have held you and your lineage frozen for decades or generations. Behind the numbness, there's always something real. Grief, fear, overwhelm, survival, sorrow, something that the system once protected. And to be met with curiosity instead of pressure can sometimes be the first step back into breath. When you begin facing your own pain with courage, presence, and breath, the kinds of people who can meet you in that field change too. Not always immediately, but subtly and unmistakably. The external shifts when the internal resonance recalibrates. Synchronicities start bringing new experiences, discoveries, interactions, and connections. So the remedy here isn't just about reconnecting with yourself. It's also about creating a field that can hold depth, so that when others who are ready can find their way back to connection too. The ancestral and collective field of numbness. Numbness is rarely just a personal response. Often it's the echo of survival strategies held in the data cloud of the morphogenic field of our DNA from our ancestors. Many of us come from lineages where feeling was dangerous, where grief had to be buried to keep going, where silence was the only protection, where the body learned to freeze as a way of not being fully here. That emotional freeze didn't end with them. It traveled across generations, encoded not just in our genes and nervous system, but in the energetic structure of our family tree. So when we find ourselves numb, shut down, unable to feel or speak, especially in the face of intimacy or vulnerability, it might not be just our pain that we're avoiding. We could be carrying the emotional backlog of those who came before us, their uncried tears, their swallowed screams, their suppressed joy, their unlived lives and unfulfilled dreams. We live in a society built on avoidance and numbing, one that rewards hyperfunctionality, distraction, disconnection, and dissociation. From phone scrolling to overworking, to busyness, to emotionally sanitized conversations, superficial content, numbness has become normalized in new ways after centuries of unresolved grief building up. The cultural trends shift over time, but what remains is the numbness. That's why this inner work matters, and it matters now more than ever. Every time you choose to stay present with your own inner numbness, not trying to fix it, force it, or flee from it, but simply being with it in breath, presence, and awareness, you're offering a new signal to yourself, and that gets uploaded into the field. As you cultivate interconnection and coherence, you become a stability node in the ancestral web and the planetary grid. The invitation, presence as permission. Grief doesn't need fixing. There's no fixing grief and loss. What it needs is the warmth of presence and the space to be felt so it has the permission to transmute into something else. Numbness isn't failure. It's not brokenness. It's not proof that you're unworthy of connection or incapable of feeling. It's evidence of the exact opposite, that you are so deeply wired for connection and feeling, your body once had to shut down part of your sensitivity in order to protect your aliveness. It's in the numbness where we lost the most of ourselves. So let's not force it open. Let's invite it gently, like approaching a horse that you don't want to startle. With breath, with intentional slowness, with curiosity and empathic listening. Presence is the medicine. So if you'd like to bring more presence into the numbness, I invite you to place one hand on your heart and the other on your belly. Let your breath deepen, and remembering this isn't about fixing anything. It's about finding yourself again. And ask the question softly, where have I been absent from myself? Just noticing with curiosity and compassion without judgment. Is there a place in me that feels distant, quiet, or unreachable? And what might this part be protecting me from feeling? Can I meet it with breath, not to change it, but to simply witness it? And if you notice a place in your body, you can begin to send your breath into that space. And if not, it's okay, just stay present with your body, with your breath. And ask yourself gently, with curiosity and not pressure, just to see if anything emerges. What am I not letting myself feel? And what am I afraid will happen if I do? And if you want to go a layer deeper, you can ask, is this mine, or am I carrying something that belonged to someone else? Who in my lineage couldn't grieve what I'm feeling now? Listen with the body and the soul, not the thinking mind. And when you catch yourself up in the thinking mind, come back to the body and the soul with your breath, with your presence. Remember, you don't need to force that place open. Just bringing your presence there, like sunlight gently warming the frost. This isn't about chasing intensity of feeling. It's about building safety until you remember that it's safe to feel. You can let your body know, I'm here now, and I'm willing to return. Even if the numbness remains, you've already changed something by noticing it. Be patient with yourself in your process. So the question isn't, why can't I feel? It's, what have I been holding that required numbness in order to survive? And the opening is, what conditions might allow that frozen grief to gently thaw now? As you sit with numbness, remember what you feel or can't feel might not have originated with you. It might be an echo, a resonance of someone who came before you who had to go numb to survive, a mother who had to keep moving after a loss she couldn't bear, a grandfather who swallowed emotion in a war to survive and get back to his family, a lineage that never had the time or the language for processing grief. Their silence became your atmosphere. Their suppression became your somatic template. Their numbness became your normal. And so when you place your hands on your heart and belly, you're not just returning to yourself, you're returning for them too. You're creating a space for everyone to liberate those feelings so the emotions can be free to move like water. You are the one in the lineage who gets to ask, what was never felt that I now can create the space to feel? The answer may come first as sensations, a temperature shift, a subtle vibration, a movement, a whisper of presence in a place that once felt vacant. When you're ready, let this awareness expand beyond yourself and your ancestry, because numbness also lives in the collective body of humanity, and we are part of it all. The numbness of genocide unacknowledged, the numbness of natural disasters or weather manipulation unfelt, the numbness of tragedies ungrieved, the numbness of stolen land and broken treaties, the numbness of pandemic panic, the numbness of pretending everything is fine in the world while the soul of humanity is quietly fading into the darkness of tyranny. Ignoring it blocks the healing process in society and in ourselves. Your act of re-inhabiting yourself isn't just personal. It's also an act of ancestral and collective healing, because it was never just your trauma and your pain that had to get suppressed for survival. Each breath that returns to a frozen place within the individual is a breath that the ancestors and the collective can begin to exhale so that feeling and movement can return. Each space that you reoccupy within yourself is one less space held hostage by historical amnesia. The gifts hidden within the numbness. You know when you've been outside in the cold for a while with bare skin exposed on your face or your hands, your skin goes numb and you can't feel your fingertips or your cheeks. Then after you go back into your warm home, as your skin starts to warm up, it may feel uncomfortable, maybe even a bit painful. Likewise, the first sign of thawing the emotional numbness is often discomfort, not clarity. The discomfort is a doorway, and we don't have to stay stuck there. Would you like to remember that you're allowed to feel and it's safe to feel? Would you like to know that you can feel it without getting stuck in the pain? This is how thawing begins. This is how the inheritance is rethreaded. not by force, but by your presence, by your willingness to stay with yourself one breath longer than before. You're not the absence. You're the space now made sacred by your return. Numbness was your protector, and it served its purpose, but it doesn't have to lead forever. When we stop blaming ourselves for not feeling it, we can begin to listen to what's under the frozen surface. When we stop forcing ourselves to feel, we begin to allow feeling to emerge. In that space, grief begins to thaw and reveal the presence that was buried underneath it all along. Coming up next, defensiveness, the armor we mistake for safety. As we thaw the numbness and begin to feel again, something else often emerges, a reflex to protect, to shield, to guard the tender places now waking up. In the next episode, we'll explore defensiveness, how it forms as an intelligent shield during times of overwhelm, and how it quietly becomes an armor that isolates us from the very safety and connection that we long for. We'll unpack its origins, its ancestral echoes, how it distorts our communication, boundaries, and relationships, and how presence, not pressure, is the key to laying it down. The thaw continues, the armor softens, and you remember you were never meant to guard yourself from life. If this message speaks to your soul, make sure to subscribe or follow wherever you listen to podcasts. Share this with someone else on the path. Someone who's ready to go deeper, beyond the surface of healing and into true integration, beyond the personal and into the ancestral, collective, and planetary layers too. And if you'd like to leave a message or a note for me, something that resonated, something you want to hear more about, you can leave a comment here, or you'll find a link in the show notes where you can send me a private message. If you'd like to work privately with me, you'll find the link for one-on-ones in the show notes or on my website, innerintegration.com. I'd love to help you connect with these themes in your own life so you can transmute them for yourself and your own lineage, creating a positive impact in your life and the world around you. I also have an epic 3-month transformational journey called Becoming You, for those who want a guide to walk with you into your own inner alchemy of wounds into wisdom, embodying your purpose, and leading with light. Remember, keep listening within. No more playing small. It's time to remember who you are. The world needs your wholeness now more than ever. You are not the wound. You are the medicine. Let your trauma become your map to purpose. Thank you for joining me today for this transmission of the Inner Integration Podcast. You're not broken. You're not behind. Your trauma wasn't a detour, it was initiation, an immersion into the very wisdom your soul came here to embody. To go deeper into this work, visit innerintegration.com. And until next time, big hug to you.